Good afternoon. This is Wednesday, March 6th, and it's 12 o'clock, and this is the Athens City Planning Commission meeting, and I'll call the meeting to order. Looking in both directions beside me, we do have a quorum. We have one member, Austin Phillips, who's not here today, but otherwise we have 4 present members. The first order of business is to administer an oath. So if anybody would like to speak today or plans and consider speaking, if they would put their right hand up and basically say that or swear to the fact that everything they are going to say today is the truth to the best of their knowledge. Yes. Okay, great. Okay, so the first order of business is the disposition, or the next order, I guess, is the disposition of minutes of February 21st. Is that correct? Yes. So I think those have all been distributed. I think the members got it today, but they also got them electronically. And so is there any corrections or additions that need to be made to the minutes? Anybody see anything? I unfortunately wasn't here for that, so I can't provide any input with regard to that.
They look accurate.
Yep.
If there isn't, then I would accept a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
I move.
A second.
And seconded. Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, and I abstained since I wasn't here.
As do I.
As you were, that's right, correct. So it's, those have been passed. Okay, the first item on the agenda is case 24-01, and it's the rezoning of a portion of Elliott Street off of between Stimson and Mill Street. So I guess would David or Megan, would either of you like to make any comments with regard to that?
Yeah, I don't see the appellant here for this request, but as we said, he's requesting that the 3 lots to the south, he owns 4 lots there, 3 lots to the south be zoned B3 from an R3. We think that a more effective zone for a buffer would be a B1 zone in this area. One of the things a B1 zone would do was it would still allow residential, probably as much residential as you can get in an R3, but then also allow business. So it's a lot more flexible zone, where an R3 zone would not allow residential on the first floor. And we have 2 existing structures that would be legal nonconforming if it went to from an R3 to a B3 zone.
Anything else that either of you might have? No?
I'll just add a comment. I feel like B1 is more context appropriate for the Elliott Street road and the surrounding residential uses.
Any of the members of the board have any comments to make?
I certainly do. I know that you and I had a conversation last week, I believe it was, and one of the items was to talk about the American Structure Point, kind of the work that they had done in this corridor, and the American Structure Point plan for the Stimson Avenue corridor didn't get as granular as this, other than recognizing that within this area, we do want to be able to, one, experience improvements in this zone, and number 2, we truly recognize, as does American Structure Point, that with that plan, we do see economic growth in this area, and in reflecting on this further, a B of some type, and in this case a B1, would fit. And again, even though Structure Point didn't get this granular, it's basically implying that this corridor will see economic growth in the future, and so it fits with the American Structure Point plan.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just a question and then a comment, my perspective on this. So a question to the staff. The back of the request of the applicant includes the recommendation from last week that was to include the parking lot to the south, which for those additional 3 lots in the rezoning as well. So when we go to pass a motion, is your recommendation that we go ahead and include those 3 lots as well?
That is owned by Athens Mold and Machine. I have a call into those, to that property owner, and I have not received anything back from them. I think that it would be advantageous to the property owner to rezone that property to a B1, but I haven't gotten any confirmation from them. So yes, I would recommend that we do that. What do you think?
I think so, yes.
And then my second point or question would be the parcel at the very north is already a B3. I think we talked previously about this, that it may make sense just to keep it a B3 as opposed to change it to B1. That way we're not changing it. So basically, for the applicant, pass a motion and an approval of changing the zoning of the 3 down below, basically those bottom 3 that he requested, to a B1, but not change the B3 at the top, because it's already B3. And that would really be an upzoning then, a more restrictive zoning to a certain extent, although you can do residential on the first floor in a B1, so that it would lend it that flexibility. But right now it's a parking lot, it's already B3. I don't see a need to change that. So, I'm prepared to give a motion at the time, when the time comes, but I know that Chris had some discussion as well.
I do have a question, because you're saying that several of the lots are owned by Athens Mold and Machine, and we haven't heard from them. So what's the protocol for changing the zoning when the property owner hasn't been notified?
Yeah, so this board will make a recommendation to City Council. City Council then would have a public hearing, and they would
Okay.
be notified during the public hearing.
Okay. Okay.
And if they opposed it, city council could modify and just include the 3 parcels that Mr. DeLuca owns?
Yes.
Okay. So,
Mr. Chair,
yes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
one more question. Is there a time urgency for having this move through the planning commission and on to council?
We don't have one. I think the appellant was looking to do some development this summer on these lots. So I think he does have some urgency.
Would it be possible for the planning commission to, table this for 2 weeks in an effort to reach out to the owners of Athens Mold and Machine? I think it would be, in my opinion, a little more prudent for us to have at least attempted over the course of 2 more weeks to get a hold of the Thorntons to see what their opinion is, rather than it migrate on from this body onto council and then only to find potentially something counter to that. Again, I have no idea, but I would certainly like to make an effort myself to reach out to the
Okay.
Thorntons and to see what their thoughts are.
I have a thought on that for the chair. From an order perspective, I don't know that we can do this, but I think we probably could. Could we make a motion that we go ahead and include that contingent upon no objection from the current property owner? Similar to when we pass a case for like a Title 41 review, where we say approved contingent upon the changes being made that were prescribed by the Engineering and Public Works Department, for instance. And so we can pull that out of the recommendation based on, staff's interaction, or pull that out of the Planning Commission's recommendation to council if the staff confirms with the owners of those 3 parcels that they don't, they would prefer not to have them rezoned.
If that's what we as a board want to do, that's fine. I would like to just make a couple of comments. I actually think that the R3 zone is a better zone there. And in light of the fact that we haven't brought forth any final plans with regard to the Stimson Avenue corridor from Structure Point and made any recommendations there. One of the things I see with what we're doing with regard to Stimson, with regard to Structure Point, is trying to promote more business development in that area, maybe more housing there as well. I kind of think that, and I feel like the way it's zoned R3 there behind that corridor is really quite conducive to what we're trying to do on Stimson. And it also is reserving more residential property closer to the campus for high-density housing. And so in a lot of ways, I feel like the R3 there is a good thing. And I'm not as necessarily as supportive of the other. But, you know, I'm happy to entertain whatever motion this board would like to entertain.
And
Okay.
Andy, I'd asked a couple of weeks ago if there was a possibility of working to find out from American Structure Point, because I too share the concerns that John shares about what's the bigger plan for that area. And, you know, it seems like there's still a lot of work for American Structure Point to do, outreach to businesses, outreach to the neighborhoods beyond just Stimson. I'm fully supportive of developing the Stimson corridor, but I too is like, have we had any kind of information on when Structure Point might begin? Not that they'd have to have final recommendations before June. but-
Sure. So I intentionally have held off any kind of work because, number one, it costs money. Now,
Yeah.
you know, before, American Structure Point was functionally free to the city of Athens because Buckeye Hills was paying for their work. Now, anything that we use them for costs money.
Okay.
I held off on signing any contract with them to continue, you know, a higher level of fidelity of, like, say, preparing a zoning overlay until Megan got on board specifically. So, you know, we're probably talking several months to get a higher level of fidelity at this point regarding a zoning overlay or something else. You know, insofar as what they've done to date related to individual parcels is they did do a calculation on looking at the existing parcels in a fairly large area around Stimson on existing property tax revenue and what a TIF could generate on baseline property valuation appreciation versus redevelopment property valuation appreciation. So, you know, not unlike the TIF we have on East State Street, you know, it was imposed prior to the building of a lot of the retail out there. And so that generated a lot more money to be used for infrastructure improvements because it was put in place, you know, before the redevelopment occurred. You know, it's a pretty heavy lift to get a TIF through. And so, you know, when the time comes, you know, we're going to have lots of discussions with council and individual property owners and hundreds of letters that go out and such. And I don't know that we could do that. I don't know that we could, you know, wait on that to approve this zoning if the applicant wanted to do. But I guess what I'm saying is I don't see this in conflict with what Structure Point came across. And I defer to the staff to a certain extent because they've read the Structure Point plan as well, so.
But I'll say, last week, David mentioned that the rezoning the R3 helps buffer, at least these subject parcels that Mr. DeLuca owns, helps buffer between the residential uses on Elliott Street and the M zone Athens Mold Machine property to the east. So there is another function besides just economic development. It's also buffering the uses.
Yeah, and I'll say again that a B1 zone tends to give you a little more flexibility. So you could, if you wanted to do residential in a B1 zone, you can still do that. If you want to do a business in a B1 zone, you can still do that. The really restriction that B1 has against the other business zones would be a drive-through, and in my opinion, a drive-through probably is not appropriate for this area.
The business zone would require commercial on the first floor though, right?
Not in a B1.
Not in a B1,
Yeah.
okay.
B2.
So it could be exactly the same as the R3.
Could actually be a little bit more because the setbacks are less in a B1 than they are in an R3, so you could actually get a bigger building in a residential building in a B1 than you could in an R3.
Do we have any examples of residential in B1 in the city that stand out? Or would it be
I'm
up?
sure we do. I can't think of any right now.
I mean, does Uptown
Up on
on
East
Court
State Street, there may
Street or
be
East State?
some.
I don't know that we
Yeah.
have any, or what's
Yeah.
I mean, we can say that in theory,
Yes,
but,
yes.
but is there a reality of that?
There's very little B1 in the city now. The one that pops to mind is the area around like Village Bakery.
Yeah, that's what I was
And I'd have to look at the specific parcels to see if some of those are residential. I think they are, especially on the south side of East State Street. And those are, but in that case, they're single-family homes. They're not higher density. It's possible that I'd have to go back and look at the corner of Madison and East State. It's possible that one, that location where the flower shop used to be is in a
Sure.
B1.
Okay.
So, but I'd have to double check.
Well, that's a good example of something that was a business that was converted successfully. Same kind of thing with the townhouses going in on what was next to Kindred, I think, on East
Right.
State also. Okay, so thanks for helping me think that through.
Okay. Did you have a comment on the discussion?
Yes, Rob Delich. I say that wrong myself sometimes still. I live on Morris Avenue here in the city, just speaking for myself. I like the idea of making this a B1. My question is about the parcels south that are Athens mold right now. That's a terrible use of that space, I think, as a parking lot. I ride by my bike on that all the time, and I think it could be something so much better there. It could be apartments, it could be a business, but it's a parking lot. So my thought, to include that might make sense. If we make it a B1, does it put some pressure on Athens Mold to do something better with that property or sell it maybe, because then it's more valuable? Anything that we can do, I think, to encourage redevelopment of a parking lot into something useful is a good thing. And if we make this a B1, does that help with that? I don't know. I'm just asking a question if that would be a possibility from a planning perspective. Is something that could make a difference? I'm not sure.
I would say it could inspire the property owner to think more creatively with that property. Just depends.
So that would move us back to Andy's suggestion, which I think is potentially a good one too, because I'm reluctant to move forward without some kind of response from Athens Mold and Machine. But if we made it kind of contingent or a conditional approval pending their thing, and I think we could still get it through in time to not hinder Mr. DeLuca.
Is there anything else anybody would like to add before we entertain the idea of a motion here? Okay, so I'll entertain a motion.
So I'll make a motion, Mr. Chair. I move that the Athens City Planning Commission recommend rezoning of the southern three parcels that the applicant submitted in this request to B1, as well as the three parcels south of that to B1, contingent upon agreement from the existing property owner that will be sought by the city staff after this vote.
Is it potentially 4 parcels?
Is there a second?
Is that a 4th parcel?
Yeah, we're only looking at the parking lot.
I will second.
That is.
Second by Mayor.
Okay, gotcha.
I assume there's no further discussion? So then, all those in favor of this motion signify by saying aye.
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 I'm going to vote no on it. Okay, so it's passed 3-1. Thank you. So now we are down to communications. The first one is the rezoning request of a portion of Grand Park Boulevard and Eden Place. So I'll turn to our city officials for,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was a request that came in to rezone this R2 area. It's just a little spot of R2. I think it's 6 parcels, maybe 5 or 6 parcels. That's to the south is a B3, and to the north is an R1. Several years ago, there was more R2 as a buffer between the business and the single-family residential. That was changed by a request so that those R2s that used to buffer the B3 zone are all now R1 except for this area here. This proposed use is going to be part of a parking area for the existing Donwood Hyundai. And I think there's a representative here that can talk about that a little better than I can.
introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. David Mott of the Naked Golf Flowing Facility on Town.
I'm not sure I can really talk about it better than Mr. Riggs, but I can certainly do it differently than Mr. Riggs. Dunwood Hyundai has been operating in that space for as long as I can remember, which isn't that long, but for a while. The 5 lots behind it are undeveloped. They're under common ownership with the equitable ownership of Dunwood Hyundai. Dunwood Hyundai needs more space. The dealership has continued to grow. Hyundai sales have continued to grow. You can just look around and see there are a lot more Hyundais on the road than there were just 5 years ago. This property has been undeveloped for years and years and years and years. And they want to pave it. They can move inventory back there, possibly some of the customer parking back there, give them room to just expand a little bit and have a more functional operation, give them the ability to potentially pull some of the vehicles back from right along the edge of the road where they have nowhere else but there to put them right now. And also, as Director Riggs noted, this is the only remaining R2 on that entire side of town, other than one piece all the way down by Hope Drive that the city owns, which I think is all hillside. And I'm happy to address any questions you may have.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Mott?
I do have a concern, and I did speak with Mr. Riggs about it because we received a letter from a neighbor, Heather Laughlin, and she has some concerns about it. Number one, that apparently there is some work starting on the property already, and some dirt being moved, and lights have been installed. And so I guess my question was just procedurally, I mean, could they be doing that on the existing zoning as it is, or and a question because of concerns with the residential adjacent to it?
My information is that Dunwood Hyundai began some very basic preliminary work before they realized they could not do that without a rezoning. Director Riggs, I believe, has more details on that than I do.
Okay.
Yeah, the existing zone has setbacks for what they had proposed to do, and if they rezone it, then the setbacks will actually get smaller, so they'll be able to develop that lot more fully. We originally asked them to send us some plans and a permit for that, and that's when we realized that they were wanting to go outside of those setbacks. So part of this rezoning request is so that they can fully utilize those lots that are behind this Dunwood Hyundai.
Okay, thank you.
And this is for Director Riggs. I mean, as I know that area, so this is currently undeveloped open space right now. There's no structures on those.
I think they have put some lighting in there, and that would be actually not on the property, but on the city's public right-of-way, and they're also seeking a separate special use of the right-of-way to address that.
But there are no homes or anything, and there's no duplexes there, which is what
No.
R2 is.
No.
And if I may comment, 3 of the 5 lots are actually too small for a duplex. And even for a single family home, they would have to be granted a variance.
Anything else?
I have a question. I think some of the concern, at least reading through the letter, which I think is going to get entered into the record for Planning Commission that we received from the neighbor. And this maybe is a question, and we don't have the answer today, but maybe it's something that we should research. Is there a ability for the Planning Commission in approving a rezoning request and then forwarding it to City Council to impose an additional level of restriction that otherwise wouldn't be in that type of zoning? And here's what I'm getting at. Could Planning Commission pass a rezoning approval on to council and say contingent upon in this particular parcels, a 10-foot buffer on the northern edge where it buffers the R1? Or is it's got to be parcel en masse, and I don't know the answer to that.
I don't either, so I'd love to research that and get back with you on it.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like some of the stuff that we have on the north side of Stimson Avenue, and there was some discussion years ago about buffers on that area and some of those, that zoning. They're, adjacent to the R1. I just can't quite remember the specifics.
I might actually have the answer on that. So if it's rezoned to B3, it would be subject to the full spectrum of the zoning regulations. There are general setback limitations for certain types of businesses, but I believe B3, and I actually brought this with me, also has a 10-foot side yard requirement. It breaks pages on me, just a second.
There's,
Yes.
yeah, it's a little odd on the B zones.
Yes, so it's this.
Yeah.
This is shown on the schedule of bulk controls.
Yeah.
As having a 10-foot minimum side yard requirement and a 10-foot minimum rear yard requirement.
Yeah,
So
that's
even
correct.
with no
Yeah.
restriction, they would have to allow a 10-foot buffer.
Okay, so that
There's no side yard setbacks in a B1 or a B2 or an M1, but a B3 does have a 10, 15.
okay.
So the minimum would be 5 on one side and 10 on the other for a total of 15.
Yes.
So picking up on what I'm thinking is, sounds to me like kind of a conditional recommendation with stipulations on it or conditions on it. So there was a concern about, would there be any kind of fencing provided? So that's something that could be a possibility that we consider, and also probably what kind of fencing, given this experience with the fairgrounds. And then the other one is the lighting, and I did drive by last night after I received the letter, and I shared with Andy, asking what were the specs for our lighting at the pool, which is downward, which our city code does require downward lighting away from, and I know there are other egregious errors on East State Street, like Domino's and some of those that kind of glare out everywhere, but the ones that are behind the Don Wood at this point are very high, very bright, and now I learned today that they're in our right-of-way. So they were installed in the right-of-way without asking permission.
Yes, ma'am.
So it would be within our rights to ask, could they come down? And they figure out something else.
Or actually a different head that maybe directs the light more appropriately or whatever.
And then get the right-of-way permission.
Yeah.
I realize it's after the fact, but.
There.
One more thought. I mean, this will also have to go through shade tree, and maybe part of the buffer is trees that are along that, within that 10-foot buffer or whatever we're talking about, which would certainly aid the properties that abut that on the north of this.
That's a good idea.
Because it's basically paving a parking lot.
I have a question. Would this, is the improvement that's proposed in the space back there trigger Title 41 or not? Because it's not a building, right?
No, it's not a building,
It's a
right?
lot.
Yeah.
And, so I have another question. You're talking about building, the zoning, flood zone? Is it? Floodplain? Does it have to be elevated?
Don't
Can
believe
we-
it's in this portion is not in the flood.
Okay.
That's floodplain.
And this would constitute passive, it's a parking area as well, to where structurally there's not anything there other than the existing building.
Well, I'd argue what we're doing is replacing 3 lots of permeable grass with impermeable surfaces. So it just creates more runoff.
Or, to clarify on that, our land development code requires retention at 5 acres and greater. However, we do have in Title V, the stormwater quality regulations, we do have a stormwater quality improvement. And so while it's not necessarily retention from the perspective of, quantity like you would with a greater than 5 acre development, it does trigger the, any kind of improvement like that you'd have to do some sort of best management practice to deal with stormwater
Okay,
quality.
thanks.
Have not seen Ms. Laughlin's letter. Did she have any other
Yeah.
concerns?
So I think she had asked, what's the procedure? She had asked that it be written read into the record because she works and she was unable to attend the meeting. So I can read that if you would like into the record. Is that what we would normally do, or? Okay, so let me go ahead and do that then. I think it's right here, I believe, so. So it's a letter dated March 5th to the Planning Commission. It says, "I am sharing concerns on the change in zoning for the lots on Grand Park Boulevard from residential to business behind the Donwood Hyundai. The work for a parking lot on this property has started several months ago and is currently being used as such prior to proper zoning. I understand the right-of-way onto East State Street is a safety issue, but the safety and needs of the residents also need to be addressed and considered. I grew up in the house at 8 Grand Park Boulevard. My mother currently resides there, and one day it is the hope that one of my children will raise their family there. Some restrictions, guidelines, residents' input need to be in place. Lighting. I have attached a picture, and I looked at that earlier, I took this morning to show how bright it is. New pole lights have been installed. They are very bright. It looks like daylight 24/7 at the end of Grand Park. In addition, if additional lights are to be installed, they need to be faced away from the houses. These lights also need to be dimmed. They are very distracting to the neighboring houses. My understanding is the rezoning is to rezone the lot that would be considered 5 Grand Park. That is very close to the house at 7 Grand Park for lights and more congestion. This would work if the current grassy area that has been left on the lots is separated, to separate the lots from residents remains. Will there be additional turn-in and outs from the parking lot onto Grand Park and Eden? This is a huge concern for safety and congestion for the residents. Residents at the lower end of Grand Park already have to deal with loud racing and reckless cars speeding up the street all day from Donwood and the business in the Chevy garage for Grand Park. Will fencing be installed to make a separation from business to residential? While not ideal, I do think this can work with the above considerations and possibly more from other residents. I am not exactly sure how the logistics work between the Planning Commission and the Zoning Board, but the affected residents mentioned in the proposal need to be notified. They have not, and given an opportunity to provide their input. As I read this, it is in the planning stages at our commission. I happen to find this is a regularly checked city agenda in my role for FENA. Thank you for your time. I will be sharing this information with residents to give them the opportunity to give input, as well as sharing at FENA. Thank you. Or Thursday. The time of noon for this meeting conflicts with my work schedule, and I am unable to attend in person. I would like to this letter read and considered at the meeting. Heather Laughlin. So I do think that there'll be the public, with regard to council, there'll be a public hearing with regard to it. And so, but I think there are some things maybe that that Don would like to consider, like the fence and, and think through the lighting and that kind of thing. So, and egress and in and outs there, how that is all structured and set up. Anybody else have anything? So, Mr. Delac?
When you're ready for the public.
What's that?
When you're ready for the public comment.
Okay. With regard to that item, sure, that's fine. Please step to the podium.
So I'm Rob Delac, live on Morris Avenue here in the city. I just said my name wrong again. I live on Morris Avenue, which is just two parcels over from, or just a parcel really between, residential parcel between me, my property, and Stimson Avenue business properties. So with residential parcels in the way that have trees and houses, I still get light from those businesses on my property. So Kentucky Fried Chicken lights, they were redone a few years ago. They shine right into my front bedroom lights in the winter. By the way, trees block them in the summer, but in the winter, shines right into the bedroom. The bank has a new sign that faces the parking lot. I have no idea why they're doing that, but it's a bright light that faces the parking lot that's a sign light. And it shines onto my front porch now. I can see it from sitting on my front porch. So the light issues are important, I'm buffered from it somewhat. These other folks are not. And so I think the lighting is a major concern here. It does impact the quality of life. I know somebody across the street that has an accessory dwelling unit that he lives in right behind some of those businesses, and he has to keep the curtains shut and on those windows all the time because it just be this bright lights shining into the house. It's not a pleasant situation. So I really think mitigating a light situation on this parcel would be important. If you can get an agreement from the property owner to do something over and above might be nice, but even it sounds like the restrictions in place should help mitigate it with downward facing lights. But that's not what's happening in the city. I just described some exceptions to that already, and they're flying under the radar screen. This is not, and maybe we need to keep an eye on it and make sure it's implemented properly. So that's a significant issue, and I think the residents have a reason to be concerned about that lighting. My other point is, you heard me complain about parking lots, and this is another example of that. This is a parking lot taking over residential space, and I hate that idea. Even though it's been owned by businesses for a long time, clearly the intent by owning it was to eventually convert it to something business-like, likely a parking lot all along. It's, we have a housing shortage in the city, as almost everywhere in the country is the case nowadays. We take away potential residential properties is not a great idea. Serving on the Board of Zoning Appeals, my very first case I voted on was a conversion of a residential lot to remove the house and put in parking for nearby rental properties. And I was the sole person who voted against it. So this has been my position all along, that it's not good for the city to allow conversion of residential properties to other uses, especially something as low as parking. So clearly the city doesn't have as much of a stake in the tax revenue from property taxes, but the property taxes in a parking lot are almost nothing. So even just thinking from a tax perspective, it's not a good use of the property. So just my word of warning about that. I think if we make a change like this, we should be mindful and be careful about doing those kind of changes, because residential lots are in shortage in the city, and these have been locked up for a long time, and sure, they've been locked up, been sitting there like this because some business owns them, and they had no intention of allowing residential to be built on them. Thank you.
Thank you. So one of the things I know, having worked at the university, with regard to lighting, there's this balance between taller lights so that you have fewer poles and you are able to more evenly wash the lot, versus lower lights which require more poles to be able to give you a safe environment. So I don't know how you balance that, but it does seem like in this case the parking lights are pretty high up there, and obviously they are distributing light back into the residential neighborhood in sounds like in a significant way. Anyway, would you like to make another comment?
I'd like to make a couple of comments in response. I certainly agree that the city needs to be purposeful about rezoning R-zone properties to B-zone properties. But this is not reducing any housing in Athens. It's not even reducing potential housing. Yes, it is currently owned by a business. It's been owned by that business and that business's owners for about 6-7 years. Before that, it was owned for an extended term, by a local landlord. And in all the years that that landlord owned it, he did not deem these properties developable. He did not see an advantage to doing so, or he would have done so. And so the alternative is these properties just remain undeveloped.
Thank you. State your name, please, for us.
Excuse me, Alan Swank, 40 Townsend Place. Thanks for reading that, John. Heather had asked me to read that long document, and when I printed it out, I think the type's about 6 points, so appreciate you taking care of that for us. I live over on the Far East Side, and this is in the 4th Ward, the ward I represent. And I drive down Grand Park and walk down Grand Park several times a day, so this is right, literally my backyard, so to speak. To be honest with you, this particular store has not been a very good neighbor to the Far East Side. Don Wood owns a Ford dealership out on the edge of town, owns a Toyota dealership, and owns the Hyundai dealership. The Toyota dealership could not be a better neighbor. When Polaris was running the ATVs up and down Townsend to test them before selling them, got going pretty fast. It was quite a hazard to the neighborhood. One simple phone call to the folks over at the Toyota dealership, and they found a place on their lot to be able to run those ATVs. Folks at the Hyundai store, a different story. They've been contacted multiple times by myself, by city residents, by the police, by the code office to get their cars back off of East State Street. You cannot come out of Grand Park now, look to your left and see traffic. We've offered all kinds of solutions, as simple as leaving those first 3 spots empty and then putting low-profile cars there. Well, when I suggested it on Monday, what happened Tuesday morning when I got there, an additional SUV was added even closer to Grand Park, further mitigating the visibility issues. A lot of these things have been mentioned today already. I don't believe just because they're going to build a parking lot in the back for cars that those cars lined up on East State Street are going to disappear. That's why car dealerships locate on busy streets, to get as many cars as possible, as close to the street as possible, for what, the 31,000 cars that pass there every day. I don't think it's going to happen. Secondly, lights, we talked about that. Those lights are so tall that I think on a good day, Joe Burrow may have trouble hitting one with a football. They're way up there. But what I just heard today really bothered me. That those lights were put in violation of code. Now, it's one thing putting a sign in front of a business that can be easily removed. But permanent lights anchored in concrete in the city right-of-way without permission. The other day, Jay Edwards talked about working with businesses and business working with the city. Well, in this case, the business needs to work with the city. And that's disturbing as a council person, in addition to being a citizen of Athens. Yeah, we're not eliminating houses. There are no houses there, but we are eliminating potential building lots. I was in a meeting today with a major developer here in town at a major business, and we asked the business, what are the things that inhibit companies from coming to Athens? And the first thing on the list was housing. The affordability of the housing was certainly important depending upon the type of business coming to town. But for businesses that pay higher wage jobs, it's not the affordability, it's the type of housing that individuals are looking for. Now, one could make the case, one did make the case, that had the developer wanted to put houses on it, they might have. We don't know that, that's speculation. But you know what? If someone were to say the reason they didn't put houses in there is because they would be right up against a business zone, you can finish that. By making that a parking lot, now the business zone moves up right against the existing houses. Is that fair to those people? I would think not. And here's one of the greater concerns. Right next door between Avon and Grand Park, we now have the city's #1 eyesore. I would invite any of you to go over on East State Street, make a left on Avon, and start up Avon towards one of our gyms, Sells Park. But before you get there, what do you run into? An absolute construction zone. A double-wide trailer that who knows what's being used for. It's not for housing. Vehicles the size of the Big Muskie and dirt and mud up and down Avon. I used to live on Avon. If I lived there today, I'd find another way home because I would not want to drive through that. Now, if you look at Mr. Wood's properties, they do keep them up. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But what's to say something could degenerate to that mess we have on Avon? Couple quick questions. With the B3, would we be required to have some sort of fencing between the lot and the housing? That's a big concern. What effect will this have on property taxes? Would this now be considered an improved lot, therefore increasing the tax base? With 3 grandchildren in the public schools, I'm certainly looking for every dollar that we can get to Dr. Gibbs and the faculty in this town. And finally, on Grand Park, we already have drainage issues. We kennel our dog out at Windy Ridge Kennel, and driving back there, you have to go back pretty much a dirt road, which results in nice, dirty tires. Well, you know what? I hope it rains when I have to take my dog to Windy Ridge Kennel, because I make it a point to go down Grand Park because the water's this deep and I get a quick and easy tire wash. We have drainage problems there. So I would request that the Planning Commission, as you always do, to look at this very, very closely and certainly hear from the neighbors who are impacted by this the most, and that's the folks that live right across the street from this and adjacent to it, both on Grand Park and on Eden. Thank you very much.
So this is a communication. Do we recommend that they bring it forward next time as a case, or do we consider additional discussion as a communication? What do we think here? I mean, I don't know what the timing for this whole thing is or anything either, so.
Go ahead.
We don't necessarily have to bring this back up in 2 weeks. I mean, if there's more information that we need to ascertain, given the questions and the comments, we don't have to go through a tabling motion or anything like that. We just sit there, and when we're ready, it comes back up as a case moving forward.
But you're saying the case does not necessarily need to come up right away?
It does
'Cause
not.
I would agree with you. I think there are enough conditions, enough questions raised.
So,
that-
Mr. Riggs, can we ask you to spend a little bit more time with the folks at Donwood, and you've heard a lot of discussion here, maybe bring back some kind of have a discussion so we can bring back some thoughts on how to address some of the issues that are there.
Yes, sir, I certainly can.
Appreciate that, thank you. Okay. So the next item under communication is the tobacco zoning and marijuana dispensary zoning. Mr. Riggs.
Thank you. The planner and I have been looking at this and having some discussions, and I do have something if you allow me to pass out. It's just my first stab at maybe some proposed changes we could make, and this is really just a placeholder where we could start discussing what you do if you want to control tobacco and cannabis sales in certain zones of the city. What we did was fairly simple, which was just to look at where we thought we would want to have cannabis establishments that sell cannabis, and you could do this for tobacco as well if you wanted. I really didn't think it would be appropriate to have it in an R zone or in a B1 zone, so I started with B2 business district, and what I did was I put in here cannabis establishments, but after thinking about this a little bit, we think that you could have other businesses that could add cannabis licenses and still have their same establishment. So we wanted to have a little more control over that. So maybe instead of establishments, cannabis establishments, we would say cannabis or establishments with a state cannabis sales license. And that way we could control, we're not licensing these dispensaries, but we would control how many can be in a certain area. So if you don't mind, if we change that from cannabis establishments to establishments with state cannabis sales license, and then no more than 2 licensed cannabis establishments are allowed within the B2 business district. And looking here, I've got the B2, there's currently 1 tobacco license in the B2 business district. Whether you want to leave that as 1 or change it to 2, it's certainly up to the Planning Commission to look at that. The same thing with B2D. In the B2D, there are currently 8 tobacco licenses. I said establish no more than 5 licensed cannabis sales establishments. You could leave that as 8. You could drop it down if you like. 17 in the B3. So I went from 17 that are existing tobacco licenses that are existing to 12 cannabis sales establishments. And then we have 4 in the M zone, and I didn't know if you wanted to restrict that in the M zone or to leave it as many as you would like to have there. The problem with M zones is that, well, it's not a problem, but the issue with M zones is that there's a lot of M zoning on the south side of East State Street, so you may want to try to limit that. But it's just to bring up for discussion. Anything you'd like to change or think we're going the wrong direction, please let us know.
I'll start. No, I don't think you're going in the wrong direction. Let me kind of give a little context to this. We clearly don't have any guidance yet from the state. This is likely to fall under Department of Commerce, much like liquor control currently does. And what I find really important about the work that you've put into this already, and for this body to be considering this, is recognizing that once they have come out with whatever the guidelines are, whether they use something similar to what liquor control does with D1 through D5 liquor permits, for any municipality, I would like to get ahead of that happening to us as opposed to us having something in place to where we have, say, by legislation and via our ordinances, zoning, that we can regulate the number in different locations. My chief concern, to be clear, is, we have very limited open retail space in the Court Street corridor or in our B2D zones. And I would certainly hate to see those all of a sudden quickly get sucked up to where a majority mixture of bars and recreational marijuana dispensaries, or whatever these are going to be called in the future. I would contend that within the B2D, which, please correct me if I'm wrong, is largely, uptown, within our B2D, that we limit that even more. I should also put out for context, I watched the construction that had to go into Harvest Medical Dispensary, as well as, I think it's called Debbie's, the property that is down by the South Y, which is our second medical dispensary. And these facilities are extremely well hardened to protect them from someone going in and breaking in and stealing medical marijuana or whatever. Again, this is my thoughts, is I could imagine that this is going to be a requirement through the state in terms of these recreational. I don't know, maybe not. I could only imagine that if they're not, they're going to have to deal with perpetual break-ins and whatever. So I think that there's going to have to be a lot of work that goes into developing a recreational marijuana dispensary anywhere in the city. But again, I'm back to my point about the B2D and, basically Court Street and the uptown area. I feel strongly that, as we're trying to revitalize, re-energize Court Street, we need to see other types of commerce, and we're slowly starting to see that. But again, my fear is that they get sucked up by someone rather quickly to be used for something of this nature, which is, in my opinion, is not the best use.
Can I ask a question about the numbers that were established for the different zones? So I see, if I'm comparing, here you're saying for a B2 zone where we currently have one, you'd allow 2 establishments. And then the proposal for B3, where we currently have 17, you'd suggest 12.
Yeah, these are licensed tobacco establishments, and we're assuming that you'll have similar things for the
Right,
cannabis
right.
license. So for the cannabis license, if we had 17 tobacco establishments, we would, just a suggestion, maybe have 12 cannabis
Okay.
licensed
So
establishments.
the other ones would, so they wouldn't necessarily be grandfathered in because there isn't anything right now, so we'd set it at 12.
Correct,
I hear what
yeah.
you're saying, okay. And then, and so the rationale for the 2 and B2, 5 and B2D, 12 and B3, and then was there a thought about the numbers?
We had one license in a B1 and one license in a B2, and if we don't want to license the cannabis in a B1, that would just be 2 licenses in a B2. That was my thought behind it. And again, whatever the pleasure of the board is, we'll do.
Okay, so was setting the numbers somewhat in line with, well, these are existing tobacco licenses already in the different zones. And I would think that if the M zone exists on the south side of State Street, that would potentially set that up. That my initial thought would be we'd want to set some limits on M because once they see they can't do it on the other side of the street, they'll be dropping down to the M.
Yes, yep.
I have a couple comments on this. I think that, I think that this body should pass zoning changes that puts a cap on the number of tobacco licenses in particular zones, state tobacco licenses, as well as pass a recommendation on the council to change the zoning for cannabis licenses. I think the two are related, but I think the two can be a kind of a parallel effort, so that they would be taken up separately by city council, because, one is a discussion about, something that is to come, and one of them is a discussion about something that already is. Mm-hmm. Now, there may be instances, and I expect there will be, where existing tobacco licensed establishments, primarily the ones that sell nothing but tobacco products and accoutrements, will seek a recreational marijuana license as well, and so they would grab one of each of of each, basically. There are other establishments that have state tobacco licenses that are probably never going to get a recreational marijuana license. My thought is a gas station that currently has a state license to sell tobacco products probably aren't going to go and seek a recreational marijuana license. And so, my concern, and this maybe has to do more with council versus this body, would be that if we were to pass or vote on a recommendation for zoning changes, and it was comprehensive as one thing that talked about both tobacco and cannabis at one thing, and then it got pushed on as one recommendation to the city council, that existing interests with tobacco licenses for whatever reason would end up stalling that. And then, as the mayor mentioned, the cannabis licenses go online, and we don't have anything in zoning about cannabis licenses. And so, ideally, we pass both recommendations up, and the city council would pick them up, and they would vote to approve both of them at the same time. But in case the tobacco one ends up getting stalled, I think that the cannabis one should go forward as a separate thing. I do think what's going to happen is that there are some establishments that have tobacco licenses that are set up to sell recreational marijuana already and are anticipating it, are probably going to apply for the licenses as soon as they come out, and put those places in. But I think we should do both, personally. I don't think this, we watched at City Council the effort to license ourselves tobacco establishments stall. And I think it's fine because the state already licenses them. We can just refer to the state's process when we talk about types of businesses. Oh, I have one other question, and I guess this is for the group. Should we further split up the B3 zones when we're doing this, instead of saying, 12 in all the B3 zones, and 17 on the tobacco licenses? Should we say B zones east of US 33, B zones north of such and such, or B3 zone north of such and such, like a sub zone, basically?
Seems to make sense to me.
I think it would help.
I do too. I think, and maybe we just simply use 33 as the demarcation point. Anything east of 33, East State Street, by and large, gets half of those, or some number, and west gets some number. Initially, when I had been thinking about this, I was thinking about, parsing it even smaller, but I think that gets too cumbersome. It's going to be difficult to manage. But to do something to where it's a larger split, and just east and west.
Okay.
I don't know. Other commissioners?
Good. It's a good idea.
I think it is a good idea as well.
Mr. Chair, one of the other things you could look at is further restricting both tobacco and cannabis distances away from certain events or activities. Maybe you want to keep them away from schools or parks. So you could, in addition to what we've got here, if you would like to do that, we could also look at 300 feet from a school or 500 feet from a school restrictions on these two types of sales.
I think that makes a lot of sense also, that we restrict it a little bit more. There.
No, I concur with this. I mean, when you look at any new liquor permit or transfer of a liquor permit from one location to another in the city of Athens, they have to follow the liquor control guidelines to where they have to basically petition if they're within 500 feet of a school or a church or a recreational facility. And I think that we certainly explore having something like that added to this. I think that's likely. I mean, that is the case for medical dispensaries now too, that they cannot exist within X amount. It's not you can petition to be within, it's no, you can't be within, I can't remember what the guardrails are on that, but they're substantial, which is why we currently have 2 dispensaries. Every other location that's next to impossible under the current state code for having medical dispensaries.
So am I hearing correctly that then we'd be kind of mirroring what the medical marijuana restrictions are and also liquor control? I suppose we don't, by putting the restrictions on number of feet from
Right.
no closer to
Well, it already
schools.
sounds like there are restrictions. Do those take care of us?
We don't know.
We don't know at this
We
point.
know for medical.
We know.
We don't know for recreational. Again, that's part of this
Okay.
as well.
And I guess my question was too, with all of the stuff with home rule, I mean,
Well, a community
think
can
we
be
should
more
try.
restrictive than the state.
We can,
But it
yeah.
can't be less restrictive. So because we're a statutory community, we have to at least follow what the state law requires. We can be more restrictive.
Unless preempted by the state.
exactly, that was my thought too, yeah, but we can give it a try.
Sure.
So I think we ought to go ahead and start to add some other language that might include more restrictions with regard to, schools in particular, I think.
So I was going to do schools, parks, recreational facilities, and maybe daycares. Does that sound reasonable?
I would just suggest that we go back and look at the restrictions based upon medical marijuana dispensaries and craft what we think or what we deem responsible for the city of Athens.
If I may, sir, I don't know that the daycares, the recreational facilities are necessary.
Okay.
Ultimately, schools and parks are probably the ones that are most, and the reason I bring that up is I don't see a daycare student going into a store and making a purchase. Now, just a personal relation of my 18-year-old, was referring to the other day about a particular tobacco establishment. He's like, oh yeah, that's the one that just sells to anybody, and I won't relay where that one is, but they're out there, as much as the folks would say that they don't. I think it is a concern, and so I think proximity to schools, particularly when we're talking, young people who look like they may be a little bit older, I think that we're in a situation where we need to pay attention to it.
Mr. Delatch.
Delich.
Morris Avenue, just speaking for myself, a lot of this discussion happened at City Council the end of last year, and it ended up being tabled. I think that's the right term for what happened. They were looking at things like you're all talking about here. So some of this might need to be zoning to do and accomplish some of these tasks. The distance from parks and places where there's children's activities going on, I think is the term they use there. I wasn't sure if you could do that in zoning, but if you can, I think it would make sense to put it into zoning. I expected that might be a city ordinance that has to be passed to do something like that. But I think even to do that, for city council to have done that, it required the licensing of tobacco retailers, which is an additional step in order to be able to then, when they come for a license, then you can make that determination and grant or not grant the license depending on the criteria that city council has set. I don't know how this works, how this plays out. If we're not licensing the establishments, we wouldn't be licensing recreational cannabis, but we could, and maybe we could do that too, I'm not sure, but we could license tobacco retailers and therefore then control where those permits go. I don't know if with the state licensing, if what we're doing is going to have any real effect. If the state can just license the way they've been doing it, they are taking no interest in or have no stake in whether or not a tobacco retailer is near a park, community center. There's two right across the street from the community center. There's one within 500 feet of the middle school. So the state's not doing a good job with this. And to the point made about that business is selling to anyone, there's almost no enforcement. So there was something like 18, in the last 5 years, 18 underage tobacco checks in the city. 18 in 5 years. And only a couple of those were repeat, like they failed and were checked again or something. The state and the federal government are doing almost nothing. So this is where the city really has an interest in doing something more. So I'm happy to hear what's going on here. I think this is all good. I agree with everything you're talking about, especially what Dr. Stone said. His points, I think, were very good and should be taken into consideration. The parallel tracks, so if one fails, the other could still go through, is a good idea as well. But dealing with limiting tobacco as well, and not just cannabis. So in the same zones you're developing, and I agree breaking it up some too, because you may want to specify in some zones that are B3 and other B3 zones, like the more residential B3 zones on East State Street to the west of 33. That's near my neighborhood. Maybe it makes sense to have fewer. There's already one tobacco plus a gas station, at least two retailers, tobacco retailers along the street there. That's probably as many as I would think need to be in that zone. And then cannabis in that zone, I think, would be not so, maybe one, but prefer those not to be right in neighborhoods if we can. And that's why I think the B1, not allowing them to B1 is probably a good idea. So keep those things in mind, I think, is my recommendation, that the city should do this, and I think should take a harder line on this than a softer line. So I think do it and do it right. I think that's everything I had. Thanks.
Thank you.
Do you have a comment back to that? I think, to Mr. Blas's point, it would be easier if there was local licensing. But given that that's probably not going to happen, I think our staff can, some little extra legwork to get information from the state when new licenses are issued to validate this. But I would contend that, getting a license to a certain extent is a change of use that triggers a zoning things. Now, if you have an existing store and you're doing it as an ancillary activity, I think that's where we need to stay on top of knowing that someone has gotten a license. But we see that with liquor licenses right now. I mean, that we do get notification of that, and we can take some extra steps with that if we're going to try to enforce these restrictions. And so, the whole licensing discussion at City Council and why it stalled, I think, had something to do with, putting extra steps on businesses and everything like that. And I think that the zoning really is the place that cities have historically had the most control, as opposed to, licensure, because courts have repeatedly upheld that cities are allowed to zone. And I think that's probably the way that we need to do it. It'll just be some more work for us. Right.
Which is a concern of mine,
Yeah.
because I think you guys are already spread pretty thin, everybody here in the city. But
I do have a question on how, I think I understand. I do understand the discussion at City Council and why that was tabled. What we're doing is proposing putting restrictions by zoning, but what I don't understand in my head, and maybe I shouldn't even worry about it now, if we make a recommendation, City Council says, great, we're moving forward with it. How do we convey that to the state so that they are watching our restrictions? Because they could go ahead and issue the application, and then the devil's to pay to try and get the application withdrawn because it doesn't meet our zoning requirements, because that person's taken the time to fill out the filing fee. And so I guess I don't, and maybe we'll settle all those logistics later.
I can speak to that, honestly.
Okay.
I mean, other types of businesses require state licenses.
Okay.
A hotel, has a state license, and a hotel is not allowed in particular zones, right? So it's a due diligence thing for a business owner to, if they're going to go down the road of getting a state license, to validate that what they can do, is allowed to occur in the particular zone that they're
Okay.
working on.
Okay.
So that was just the one that comes to mind. I'm sure there are a bunch of ones.
Trust the system works. Okay, thanks.
okay, so then is there any other discussion with regard to communications with regard to the planning commission goals? Do we need to talk about that at all today? Does anybody have any? I'm looking at the time now, and I know everybody's busy. And is there something we should discuss further about those? No? Don't see it.
We had a draft.
Right.
We looked at the draft, we revised it, we came back, we revised again by adding the housing. I
Right.
think Andy added that, and then we did a proof and
So I'm assuming those are our goals.
Good, I think.
And so maybe like every 4 months or 3 months or something, we ought to pull them out and see where we are with them. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's try to do that.
do we want to make a motion to approve them? Or do we need to?
We can, it's a communication, and we have taken communications before and elevated it to a case to where we vote on it.
Okay, so do we want to, okay, is there a motion to approve the,
I move that we approve the goals
Okay.
as set forth in the February 21st list.
is there a second?
Second?
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any against? There's nobody against, that's 4-0. Okay, how about reports? Mr. Riggs, do you have anything to discuss today?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did want to talk a little bit about one of the requirements of the Planning Commission is to maintain control over subdivisions. Those are both major and minor subdivisions. So I've got some information, but we're running a little long, so if it's okay with you, I'd like to go ahead and discuss that at our next meeting.
Okay, that'd be
I've got
fine.
some suggestions to meet the Ohio Revised Code requirements, as well as make our job a little easier.
Okay, perfect, that'd be fine. And that's it for you
That's it
then?
for me.
Okay, So Megan, do you have anything for us
I
today?
don't have anything additional to report.
Okay. So, are there any other report? Andy, do you have anything? No? Okay. So then, we have an opportunity for citizens to speak, and we've entertained most of that already, I guess, unless there's some other topic you'd like to discuss, Rob? No? Okay. So, the only other thing that I would like to suggest is, and this is me saying this, I would like to consider at some point in the not-too-distant future, kind of, if we don't have much on the agenda, maybe having a little bit of discussion about zoning overlays. I really just don't understand those, so I don't know if, our planner could give us a little bit of an education on that. At least for me, that would be beneficial.
It would be for me, too.
Okay, so as we get ready to take a look at this overlay at some point down the road, that would be helpful. So that's all I had under other business or announcements. Anybody else have anything? Okay, so our next meeting then is March 20th. That would be Wednesday noon here in City Council chambers. So with that, we're adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks.